My name's Claire Healy, and I work with administrating the grant. I want to thank my colleagues Emmanuel and Sylvia for being here today, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see some known faces and some new faces. I invite folks to introduce themselves in the chat. Feel free to pop in your name, preferred pronouns, and the organization and group that you work with. We have a lot to cover in the slides that we're excited to get to, so we appreciate folks holding their questions until the end of the presentation. But again, do feel free to utilize the chat for that feature. If you would like to put the question there, we will get to it at the end of the presentation. And then we want to remind folks that this session is being recorded. For those who aren't able to make it live, it will be posted on our website. So just do whatever you feel comfortable with in terms of having your camera on or off. Before we begin the presentation, it's important to the food bank to acknowledge that we are all living and working on the ancestral and occupied lands of several O'odham and Yaqui communities. We understand that this is a sensitive topic that impacts our community in countless and diverse ways, and we invite you to reflect on the harm, displacement, and settlement that brings us here today. We also acknowledge that this written acknowledgement in itself is not enough. It's just the beginning, in fact, and it must be paired with action. The food bank is honored to partner with tribal communities through the Thriving Communities Grant and other outlets, and on projects focusing on things such as land stewardship, food sovereignty, community health, cultural preservation, and more. Our agenda for the day includes talking about the grant purpose, also covering eligibility, as well as what are the high priority projects for this grant round and the elements of a strong application. Then we will talk about stewardship of resources from the food bank's perspective, also cover funding amounts, the process timeline, share an opportunity for a grant writing workshop, and then, like I said, we'll turn it over for conversation and have a Q&A. With the Thriving Communities Grant, oh, I'm getting an echo. With the Thriving Communities Grant, we are seeking to support folks engaging in projects benefiting our community through food security, health, social justice, and the root causes of hunger. This ties into our mission of creating a healthy, hunger-free tomorrow, and it's something that we know we can't do alone, so we're really grateful for those of you doing aligned work in the community and honored to be in a network with you all. All right, when we're talking eligibility, if your group has an operating budget of under $1 million and your project is taking place in the Southern Arizona service area, which includes Cochise, Graham, Greenlee, Pima, and Santa Cruz counties, you very likely meet the basic eligibility. In the following slides, we'll cover what the highest priority projects are for this funding, but whether you have 501c3 status, whether you have a fiscal sponsor, or whether you need a fiscal sponsor, you are welcome to apply. I want to note that the cap on applicants with operating budgets over $1 million is new this year and seeks to prioritize resource sharing to smaller groups and increase funding accessibility to those who have faced barriers to funding. It's also reflective, which I will talk about more later, but of us having a smaller budget overall and a smaller budget for community grants this year. Perhaps the best way to think of this cap on organizations with over $1 million is that if you have tax exempt status, whatever organization's name is on your 501c3 letter, that they should have an annual budget under $1 million to be eligible. So to further clarify, to give an example, since I know we do have some larger orgs working within a network, even the food bank itself, we have main offices in Tucson, and then we are in those 5 different counties. So a hypothetical scenario, to give an example, if you imagine the Thriving Communities was awarded by another grantor, so not the food bank, and the food bank's Green Valley branch wanted to apply for funding. In this scenario, we'll say the Green Valley branch is operating with less than $1 million annually, but the food bank itself is operating with a budget higher than that. So in this case, they would not be eligible because essentially they are under a parent or an umbrella organization, the food bank, which total budget exceeds the eligibility cutoff. The same would be true for schools under a district or schools within a university, as well as churches under a larger church or a big network of churches, and government departments and offices. The same does not apply for groups without tax exempt status, and that's because the organization that they use for fiscal sponsorship is merely holding funds for them, not actually using those funds for the project. So I hope that that feels clear, being a new piece and kind of a big piece. And if there are questions about that, again, happy to address it during the Q&A. As we think about ways that the food bank is prioritizing reducing barriers to funding for smaller groups, another big example of that is through fiscal sponsorship. I mentioned Sylvia is on this call. She is the person running Avanzando LLC, which is the food bank's branch for fiscal sponsorship. And fiscal sponsorship is a tool that allows groups without 501c3 status to receive tax-exempt grant funds. So if you need a fiscal sponsor and you are working with other 501c3 nonprofits, sort of have that network build up, we ask that you consider seeking fiscal sponsorship through them because we do have limited capacity. So think about your network. If that is an option, great. If that's not, you don't have other options, we absolutely welcome your request for sponsorship through Avanzando. And also in the decision process, there would never be a case where someone needs fiscal sponsorship and we maybe don't have capacity. That would not be a reason for not awarding that. So if we select your project as one that we want to fund, rest assured that we will figure out a way to get you those funds in the proper route. And then in terms of expressing your need for fiscal sponsorship through Avanzando, that happens on the application. It's the same spot where a tax-exempt organization would upload their IRS tax determination letter if they are a nonprofit. The grant can fund quite a wide array of projects. In the past, we have funded infrastructure, training, community organizing, educational projects, pilot projects, evaluation efforts, and many more. In a couple of slides, I'll give some more examples of projects that have been funded and what they've sort of really looked like on the ground. These are elements of a strong application, and I want to point out that these are also the metrics, not only that we share with you to sort of build your application around, but also these are the questions and metrics that the grant evaluators will use when going through the applications. So firstly, we are looking for an applicant to clearly describe what is the issue and what is the intended impact of the project. We would like you to be specific about who are those affected by the issue, who are the intended beneficiaries of the project, and most importantly, how are those people either leading this project or really intentionally being centered. And those will be the strongest proposals where we really see those with the lived knowledge being the one leading the action. We also are going to be looking for whether or not there's demonstration of benefit to other organizations or other similar work being done, strengthening the network of partners throughout Southern Arizona. And then we give some examples of what a thriving, equitable community looks like to us. And so in this category, we're not expecting every project to meet all of these, but for you to say, my project advances racial or health equity, and it does so in this way. Also, it could be that a project is increasing organizational capacity to engage in justice work, creating social cohesion among communities, growing access to healthy, culturally appropriate food, as well as increasing economic opportunity. And certainly, it's not limited to these things, but we want to give some examples for you all to elaborate on your application. The highest priority projects fall into three categories. The first is that the project would be strengthening the local food system. Secondly, we welcome projects that provide community education, specifically in relation to health, access to essential services, growing food, nutrition, job training, economic opportunities, and cultural preservation of historically disinvested communities. And thirdly, we will continue supporting emergency food distribution efforts, particularly things such as infrastructure improvements, organizational capacity building, and improved and dignified service delivery. So, what are some examples of projects that have fallen into these categories? What do they really look like? The first that comes to mind in Cochise County, a very rural area, grantees have established a local food co-op which accepts Double Up SNAP and sources from several local growers. This project is increasing food accessibility and supporting the local food network as well as the economy. We've also funded projects for land and infrastructure sharing among established and new farmers seeking to increase farming knowledge, opportunity, and access to local food. In Graham County, there is a collaborative project providing health and nutrition education and connecting folks to medical and other social service resources by pairing community health workers and local food pantries and community centers. Another example is a group in Pima County that provides free financial and entrepreneurial education to immigrant women, helping to build community as well as economic opportunity. Additionally, we've supported several cultural preservation projects such as Indigenous-led seed saving and gardening projects and land trusts seeking to keep neighbors in their homes, fight against gentrification, and preserve the cultural history of some of our region's oldest neighborhoods and agricultural centers. And we also support our partners across all 5 counties in emergency food distribution through things like infrastructure to implement client choice models, to improve data collection, and to receive training on topics such as diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to turn now to talk about stewardship of the food bank's resources. We understand that traditionally food banks have been thought of, for the most part, in this sort of singular role as food distributors. While this remains a large part of our work, we also recognize that the path to a healthy, hunger-free tomorrow additionally relies on community development, such as grants to the amazing folks doing the work across Southern Arizona. You all. um, Providing food to our partners through low or no cost streams is a really important but also distinct piece of work from CFB's efforts overall. As stewards of the food bank's resources, we work tirelessly to leverage donations and the bulk buying power that we're able to have to source large amounts of quality food at reduced rates that simply aren't available at stores or for smaller purchases, individual purchases, things like that. So, in other words, centralizing the path with which CFB provides food allows us to get the most food out to community, to partners for the best price and act as a food purchasing organization and intermediary in Southern Arizona. With all of this in mind, we know that for some, food is the primary need. And if this is the case, we ask that rather than applying for the Thriving Communities grant, you consider applying to be a formal food distribution partner. Here is the link on the side to do that, to fill out the interest form. And you can also learn a little bit more about partnership and access this form by going to our website, communityfoodbank.org, and then clicking on the tab How We Help and clicking down to Community Partners. Still thinking about funding and wanting to share what this year's giving landscape is. A big reality for us, I'm sure for everyone, is that pandemic era funds have really run their course. During the last several years, we had lots of additional funds to support various project needs and budgets. But like is true pretty much nationwide for nonprofits, at this time we're seeing quite a reduction in funding and in our overall budget. Um, oopsies, there we go. Um, we actually have about half of the giving budget that we did last year when some of those funds were still available, and less money to give since the pandemic started 4 years ago. Despite fewer funds being available, though, please rest assured that we remain committed to giving more annually in community grants than we were giving before the pandemic began, and there was sort of this unexpected influx of money. So, although those COVID funds allowed us to significantly increase our spending, we want to continue now that things are in some senses back to normal. We want to continue building our community support from the funding levels that were standard before the pandemic funds were so abundant. Keeping in mind the purpose of the Thriving Communities grant that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, that we're really seeking to address root causes of hunger and support longer term investments in community, as well as that our really best, most responsible way to share food with community is through formal food partnership. We want to note this limit on food purchases for the Thriving Communities grant. We know and we hear folks saying that the line between supply distribution and community building root cause work is very rarely distinct. So often they do intersect. So because of this, if you do find yourself in circumstances where food or other single-use supplies are really critical to your project, you may request those as part of the budget, but only up to 10% of the budget for those consumable or single-use items. For funding amounts, we have, as in previous years, individual organizations with the ability to request up to $20,000, and then collaborative projects, which includes two or more organizations, can ask for up to $50,000. And then part of the collaborative application does include letters of commitment. In previous years, our collaborative amount had been 60,000. That was another big perk of the last 4 years and that big influx of funding. But again, I mentioned we have a much smaller budget this year. So we have reached a compromise sort of between being able to fund as many projects as possible, but also wanting to incentivize collaboration, having it be, not two organizations getting 40,000, but having a little extra funding to share between them in a collaboration. So yes, please note if you've, been here year after year that collaborative proposals are now funded up to $50,000. In an effort to streamline both the application process and the evaluation process, this year there is a template for letters of commitment which are required for collaborative projects. In the past, we've gotten a lot of letters of support, so sort of general encouragement and praise for an organization or project, but there hasn't been the details really needed to specify the commitment to collaborate in specific ways on a project where there are distinct roles and contributions which add to a project in a way that an individual group would not be able to. So a commitment letter should show how the collaboration is happening in detail and demonstrate how working together strengthens the overall project and the ability to achieve its goals. So we hope that that template will be helpful for folks, and it is included on the application as a link. Another note about collaborative projects, while the main applicant who submits the application and is sort of the convener of the collaboration, I already mentioned, must be a group working with less than $1 million annually. It is okay for them to collaborate with bigger groups that have more financial resources, including exceeding $1 million annually. In that case, what we would want to see in the project budget is that at least half of the funds are allocated towards the main applicant. And we would also hope that those more financially well-resourced collaborating organizations would be contributing some of their work in kind or matching some funds if the grant is awarded. Our process timeline is exciting because we're opening for applications very soon, a week from today, in fact. So 9 a.m. on Wednesday, October 9th, you'll be able to access the application and start submitting on Grant Interface. We'll be accepting those applications until 6 p.m. on Wednesday, December 11th. And a note to please keep an eye on your email with which your grant interface account is associated, because there are cases in which maybe something isn't loading on the application or we need more information or have a clarifying question. And so we would not want anyone to miss their chance or be disqualified because something was incomplete and they didn't realize it. Then decisions will be communicated to applicants by the end of March 2025. Seems far away, but I'm sure it will be here much sooner than I expect. And then funds will be awarded the funds that are awarded will be sent out by the end of April 2025. There is an asterisk here because we do have some folks who applied last year and still have an award that they are working on. So in that case, the award will be mailed only after they have confirmed full spending of the previous award on their final report submission, and submitted that to Grant Interface, as well as submitting their grant agreement as also in Grant Interface. I'm really thrilled to share this opportunity. Again, shout out to Sylvia for making this possible. We are offering a Grant Writing 101 workshop in both English and Spanish here at the food bank. Registration is required and space is limited, so we just want to make sure we have enough space, want to know who's going to be in the room, and then there's also a little bit of fun homework to bring to the workshop that will allow it to be a lot more hands-on. The Grant Writing 101 workshop will equip individuals with basic knowledge and skills to craft compelling grant proposals. It's important to note that this workshop is not limited in any way to the Food Bank's Thriving Communities grant. Rather, it offers a general framework applicable to various grant writing scenarios. We extend an open invitation to the public, including those who have never written a grant before, but are eager to learn the fundamentals of the process. This workshop aims to help empower folks with the tools they need to pursue grant opportunities to help fund the really incredible work that is taking place in our community. And this workshop was also created at the request of feedback from community members that this would be a helpful resource. So again, if you want to register for the Grant Writing 101 workshop, that can be found on the Food Bank's website, communityfoodbank.org, underneath the How We Help tab, and then on the Grants and Loan Opportunities webpage. You should all be familiar with it because to register for this info session, you went to the same spot. Now, I just want to remind folks that if questions come up later on or at any point in the year, if you want to reach out to us for any reason, partnergrants@communityfoodbank.org is the best spot to reach us. And you can also call the number listed on this slide. But now I will stop my monologue and am really curious to open it up to see what questions folks have. So thank you so much for your attention, and I will stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone's faces. Although Teams likes to bounce me around. Okay, here we are. So what questions do folks have, or Sylvia, did any questions pop up in the chat during?
No questions. However, me and Emma put the link for the Grant 101 workshop, and then also the partners that want to be partners for food distribution. So
thank you so much. If you do have a question, go right ahead and turn your mic on. It's casual.
In the funds, is this a grant that you can apply for multiple years in a row?
Yes. At this point in time, we don't have a limitation on that.
I was wondering, you mentioned there will be a cap on the number of grants awarded. Do you know the number, or do you have more information about that?
Yes, so the cap I was referring to is for eligibility. So those welcome to apply would be groups that have under $1 million a year operating budget or are they can collaborate with larger groups, but that main applicant has to meet that budget eligibility. And in terms of how many actual projects will fund, it isn't something we know at this time, just because we aren't aware of how many individual versus collaborative projects will be submitted or chosen. But we do expect to give a total of $780,000 this year. So about half what we were able to give last year and again in the previous 4 years.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question.
Go right
Are you
ahead.
able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Our organization is looking to form a community land trust. Could the funding be used towards a land purchase?
This is something that is possible. We try to approach things as rather than putting limitations on it, we really put the power into the application. So that could be possible, and I would suggest that you add a lot of details to the application of things evaluators will probably want to know, like what is the total budget? You know, if we give this grant, land is expensive. So, you know, if it's an individual project, it may be 20,000. If it's collaborative, it may be 50,000. So sort of putting together that whole puzzle for us of this is what we would be able to accomplish with your contribution. Here is the other inputs that are coming together to make this happen, and really share, of course, the great knowledge you have about how land trusts are able to build capacity, build accessibility, equity, all of these things within community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There's another person who wrote in the chat. They said, we run a foster care clothing bank. We provide essential needs to children in foster care, mostly clothing. Is this a type of project that could be funded? We are a 501c3.
So I could certainly see this organization submitting an application. We would not be able to fund over 10% for consumable supplies, so including clothing in that. But you may want to submit an application for things like infrastructure, programming, staff time, all of those things could certainly be considered. But yes, please do note that if food, clothing, hygiene supplies, things like that, we just in our stewardship of the resources, we are having to limit those to 10% of a budget. I hope that answers the question.
Hi there, can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunately, I couldn't figure out how to turn my camera on or name myself, but I'm Shauna and I'm with Tucson Rock Camp. So my organization does community organizing through music and music educational programs for young people. So I was wondering 2 questions. One, if you have any examples of programs that have received funding that were like possibly more aligned with community organizing through the arts, or like education related more to mental health and well-being. Is that something that has been funded before?
That is something that sort of on a case-by-case basis has been funded. It hasn't been the bulk of the projects, just because we are the food bank. Of course, in the slide, hopefully it came across that we are trying to sort of break those the idea that we're just about emergency food distribution. We do really value community building in its many forms. We love the arts. Um, I think from an organizational standpoint, I would refer back to the slide of those sort of top 3 priority categories. So those types of projects um, will likely be the ones to receive funding first. So it seems like there could be some overlap because one of those categories is community education. We're looking more so to fund things like food systems work, gardening, nutrition, community organizing for certain advocacy and things like that, as well as cultural preservation. So I would say maybe with you and the folks you work with, think about how does your work already, or how might you be interested in, something like a cultural preservation through music project, for example, or how might would your beneficiaries like to have a garden or something like that, or like an outdoor music space that integrated, say, food and land stewardship practices or something.
Thank you so much.
Taylor,
Hi.
oh,
Sorry.
hi, go ahead. Oh, hi, Jillian.
Hi. I was wondering, we'd like to hopefully like uplift a couple of our really small ranchers in terms of like building infrastructure for them to increase their production, or almost like complete the cycle of their ranching processes. Would infrastructures for like is like meat or increasing like like that part um qualify for like infrastructures for them?
Yeah, I think that definitely could possibly qualify. It's certainly having to do with the local food system, and, in a more rural area. So I think it would be, um, essential in the application to really tie in how is that building on the access that your project is already doing to increase, you know, high nutritional value food, lots of access to local fruits and veggies, and how that sort of supports the overall food system, as well as economy around McNeil.
Okay, great. And then if you were mentioning earlier like 50% of the funds should go to the main applicant, um if we were so like essentially we would all be like applying as a collective, um as we are already. So do we have to like specifically name which like farm or ranch is how they're participating in this, I guess, grant project?
Yeah, so when I mentioned that for collaborative projects, specifically, I mentioned that 50% should go to the main applicant in the case that they are collaborating with a larger group that has that budget over $1 million. So I don't think that that is the case for your project, from what I know. So in sort of a collaborative project where that doesn't apply, you would want to say, this is the breakdown that we think, this ranch is providing this farm is providing this, the local co-op is doing this. We do want to know how it's being allocated, but if everyone involved is working with a budget under $1 million, then it doesn't have to be that at least 50% going to the local co-op. It can be more shared. We just, because this year, these bigger organizations that have so much more access, if they have $1 million budget or higher, they can't apply on their own. So we don't want to have have a case where they're applying collaboratively, but they're getting most of the money, that just wouldn't make sense. So
Gotcha. Thank you.
you're welcome. Thanks for the question. Are there any other questions coming up for folks? I will pause. Okay, well, it seems like all the questions have been answered. Again, feel free to reach out anytime at all at the Partner Grants email or the phone number listed. And I really appreciate everyone's attention and great questions, as well as just the inspiring and wonderful work that you all do. So thanks so much for being here. And if there's nothing else, well, let you get back to your day. And thanks for helping me field questions and pop in links in the chat, Sylvia. Thank you so much, everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.